Okay, good morning or afternoon, everybody, wherever you may be tuning in from. This is another Pollstar live digital session with noted industry figure Jim Fleming, who's been running Fleming Artists for more than 40 years, and agent Lara Supan, who's in rural Ontario. And we have Jim coming from Ann Arbor, where he's been for a long time, and we have a lot to discuss. So I guess we could say hello and get a quick intro from Jim.
Hey, Ryan. Good to see you.
Lara, welcome. And everyone working from home right now and watching from home, and hopefully everyone's staying safe and doing their best right now. So I guess Fleming, with its notable roster of a lot of folk artists and a lot of artists of different types, has, like many in the business right now, sort of pivoted and still doing the core agency representation, looking out for artists' best interests, but things are needing to be a little creative right now. And I think we have a lot to discuss that way, including sort of with the agent's role right now, Jim, if you could talk about that.
Well, thanks, Ryan. I think that the agents, our role as agents hasn't really changed this agency for the past 40 years. In regard to our primary responsibility is still to find work for the artists. And at a time like this, it's new challenges, definitely. Because a lot of people are coming on board with the virtual shows, which I think is going to play heavily in our future, even after this crisis passes. Some are coming on slowly, some are coming on very quickly, a lot of them are right in the middle, but we're trying to make it as easy as possible on both the artists and the venues to come on board and try this out. And in order to do that, we're trying to give them all the tools that will help them to be able to do that successfully, including the kind of deals that we work with them. We're doing a lot of, I think a lot of people in the industry are doing this straight percentage deals because this is all new territory for all of us. And so we're not putting the venues at great risk. We're trying to be ahead of the curve in terms of what we anticipate to happen, because I do think in the future, like I said, especially with the older audiences, that they're going to be a little slow, and the more vulnerable audiences are going to be a little more slower to come out. So we're trying to create as many opportunities in that regard. But I also think that eventually we could see a situation where you're going to have tours that could be a combination of virtual and live. So we're on the front end of this, and we are already being, I'd say, pretty successful at being able to turn some tours into virtual tours, and again, being able to partner with the venues and doing that, and the artists.
For sure. I think what's notably interesting about what you're doing is partnering with the venues to make more of an actual tour stop rather than just a show that can be from anywhere and viewed by anyone. Right. Can you talk more about some of the specifics of that?
Lara, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we, when this first hit and all of our shows canceled within a week of finding out about it. I mean, it's like, I remember where I was when we started getting the calls because all of a sudden all of our tour calendars were completely wiped clean for the rest of March, and then April, and now May, and who knows. We started questioning what it was to be an agent, what it is to get our artists work. And what came out of that was the only thing that is able to happen right now, which is at-home shows with at-home setups. And we knew that our artists were jumping on that pretty quickly. Those that had already been doing live streams previous to this, those that had a studio setup that all of a sudden was able to transition very cleanly to an at-home stage. But then we had a bunch of artists that had not gotten into this because they were used to being on the road. They were used to doing real live in-person shows with stages that were provided for them. So we went to our artists first and we said, we still want to provide for you, and we need to figure out what that means and what that looks like. And what we came up with collaboratively with our artists, but also looking at the environment and looking at what's being offered and taking some guesses about what's going to happen in the future, we decided that partnering with venues and using their mailing lists, using their promotional capabilities, their socials, their reach is going to be something that is very important to not wear out our artists' fan base in the near future, and also further along the line. So we looked for platforms that were working more along a paywalled, ticketed platform rather than doing the free live streams via Facebook, not sponsored. Because Jim talks a lot about this, and I agree with that. We need to protect the value of the artist. And what we can do as an agency is make sure that people are still experiencing very intimate shows. They can be related to a venue or a location, but this provides something different than what the artist is able to provide for themselves, which is the Facebook Live, the YouTube Live, these public shows that they're able to do direct to their fan base. So what we're currently doing is partnering with a company called Side Door. They're a Canadian-based company out of British Columbia, and they are currently working to build a paywalled, ticketed platform where they can embed streaming shows into their platform. And what we can do with that is we can go to a venue, have them sponsor the show, have them put it out to their mailing lists, and then we can also include them in the ticket revenue, because we're very concerned we're very concerned for the ecosystem, the whole touring ecosystem, which includes the venues being able to make enough money to continue to operate, especially when they're able to reopen, but they're under such physical limitations that it might not even be worth it for them. They might not even cover their overhead. That we are able to get revenue to the venues in any way that we can as well, to continue a healthy ecosystem during partial reopenings, full reopenings, and whatever the next 6 to 12 months is actually going to look like.
And I might add to that too, that model for us isn't any different than it's ever been in terms of how we've approached relationships with venues and artists. Is we see it as a triumvirate where everyone has to come away from it feeling good and feeling taken care of. And so it's us representing the artist, it's the artist and slash managers, and then it's the venue. And so we're very cognizant of that. And we've also been always been a very artist-oriented agency. So the thing we kind of had to throw out right away was any concern about finances, because the hit that we took, all of us took, everyone in this industry, anyone that's in this industry that's looking right now, I can assure you across the board, it's not one of those situations where you can say, you can't believe what just happened to me, because everyone's going, oh, I can believe what happened to you. So we've always thought that if we do the work and do it right, that the money will come, and we still feel that way with this as well for everyone. So that's been part of our approach too, is not us worrying so much about, well, okay, what's the commission on this particular date going to be or whatever. We're just like, right now, that's the last thing in the world we should be thinking about. What we should be thinking about is keeping the lives of the artists to be healthy financially, but also the venues themselves. We want them to stay in business. So.
Right, it is important. I'm sure you're able to utilize the venues, have great marketing teams and great platforms as well. And between the artists and the venue, it is very collaborative, and you're able to both do shows to an extent. Can you talk about some of the shows you've done so far? And I know you have a virtual roster that is specifically which artists are available for booking representation in a virtual capacity, right?
Yeah, I'm going to let Lara speak to that, because early on we created on our site. If you go to our site, flemingartist.com, you'll see that we have a virtual. So we approached all of our artists, asking them which of them they would also like us to represent them for virtual shows, and we had a really high percentage of the artists that signed up. But Lara can speak to the shows we've done so far, but because of the transition, a lot of them are just coming up. And I know we're going to talk about this a little later, but the Singing Out tour, for instance, we've turned that in June, we've turned that into a virtual tour, but I can speak to that later. But Lara, do you want to talk about the virtual roster and some of the tools that are there?
Sure. When we approached our artists about this virtual roster, we were very clear. Like I said before, I'm a musician myself, first and foremost, and I got into booking after booking my own shows. And so it's a priority for me, and I know that it's a priority for Jim, that we do not take money from artists that they could be making for themselves. So when we approached our artist with this idea of virtual representation, we made it very clear that their direct to fan donation-based platforms that they were already using would not be affected. We're not taking percentages from our artists when they reach out directly to their own fan base, because that's not something, I mean, personally, that's not something I would do. But what we offered is the fact that we have wonderful relationships with so many venues. And we found this platform that we're very excited about, Side Door, to use. And so right now we are doing a lot of front end work to build relationships with venues, especially venues that may not understand how to get online, may be pretty daunted by this idea of going behind a paywall, figuring out what OBS is, what whether to use YouTube or Zoom or Vimeo, and we can be that kind of representative for these venues to help them figure out how to get online, how to promote a show, and how to make some revenue from this. So when we approached our artists about this, we said the virtual shows that we're going to do are partnered with the venues, and above and beyond what our artists would be able to get for themselves. So yes, we had a huge positive reaction from it. What we are providing to the venues and the promoters is we started a Thursday Zoom meeting. It was Jim's idea, and such a wonderful idea for so many reasons. But one of the things that continues to come up by artist request is technical help with setting up an at-home studio. And we actually have collaboration happening between the artists themselves. A few of our bands and artists are tech geniuses and are writing 23-page papers on how to use OBS and all that. So they're jumping in and helping our tech challenged artists set up and figure out what equipment they need and what the best background is for their home, so they're not trying to record in a stairwell or a barn or outside with the lawnmower going. And what venues really appreciate about that is we're able to provide a sample of the at-home setup, because I know a lot of venues are very worried about quality control. Normally when you're in a venue, it's their stage, it's their production equipment, it might be their sound man, and they have no control over any of that when they're producing a show, quote unquote, that's in an artist's home. So what we're then offering to the venues is a sneak peek at what the artist has set up. We have a lot of clips and examples on our page. It's flemingartist.com/virtual shows with a hyphen between virtual and shows. But if you click on those artists, you'll see up at the top of their page, there are live stream examples of where they are, of what they're doing, how they might interact with their fans via chat, what platforms they're using. So the venue can really see in advance kind of what they're going to be promoting and sponsoring. And I think that's a big relief for a number of the venues, because then they know that somebody's not shooting with their cell phone camera in a stairwell somewhere, which really helps, because we don't want our artists to be doing that either. So we've seen a really positive reaction. We've only done a couple, like Jim said, because a lot of these shows are just coming up. Gosh, I think we have at least 10, 15 booked in the next couple weeks, I would say. But the ones that have happened so far, I think Heather May did one with Side Door as a private show, kind of as a test. She adored it. Erin McCune also did a private birthday party, which we're in the middle of a pandemic and things are pretty bleak, but it's really amazing to hear some of these stories. Erin just absolutely loved this surprise birthday party that she did via Zoom, where I think there were about 15 people on the call, and she surprised her partner. The woman surprised her partner with a concert from Erin. And she just said the emotional response was so amazingly wonderful to connect with these fans, these individuals face to face. They got to ask questions, do a Q&A. The partner was able to pick the set list. And this is something that is great that's coming out of virtual shows, because it really is a connection with the artist that we haven't seen before. So we're getting extremely positive responses from the artists that have been able to do these virtual shows so far, and I expect that that will continue.
There's a few notable things about the virtual performance. Like we said, you both mentioned the importance of not diluting the content. You can watch a lot of artists right now, so you need to probably be very targeted in your execution of it, as well as be sure that it's of a certain quality, that production value as well. Do you have to sort of get into a realm that you're not as familiar with as far as the producing and the videos? I know with the Zoom meetings, you're able to share a lot, including your client, Jeff Daniels, who's been at the biggest level of show business, of course, so he's able to share some of his knowledge with the recording and performing. But the production side, are you able to sort of adapt to that quickly? I mean, we all know people and we all have a lot of connections, but it's still probably some challenges.
Well, we have a in-house tech guru, Ben Podak, who looks after that. And you know, for the agents that might be watching this, one thing I discovered early on was my limitations when it came to aptitude around a lot of this tech. And I'm going to try to answer your question, and if I don't, just feel free to ask it again. But what I discovered was it was a better use of my time. Lara's very adept at all of this. I'm not so. So I've done what I've done my whole career, and that is that I have other people that I work with that complement the things that I'm not. You know, Cynthia, our wonderful business manager, Carla, who looks after everything day to day, and keeps everything so organized so brilliantly, and Ben, who knows tech. And I thought, why am I going to put myself in a position where I might have to answer questions and go find the answers and come back? So once I set up a show, you know, for Jeff or someone else, because today we just confirmed another Jeff Daniels virtual show, then I turn it over to Ben, and then Ben is there to assist the promoter if they have questions. And so there's an awful lot to learn in a very short period of time. And I think it's really important that someone in our capacity knows what they should be spending their time on. And that my primary responsibility is getting the artist's work. And so I'm trying to do that and then turn all the technical things over to someone else to answer. But, you know, the comprehension of that is really a challenge sometimes. Getting back to the tech part, it's been and if you don't mind, maybe I'll talk a little bit about our weekly get-together. We call it the get-together. We've been able to use that for these artists, you know, everyone from people in their 20s to people literally in their 80s, to share information with each other and support each other. And Jeff was on last week, and he came on and talked about the use of the camera, you know, as an actor. And excuse me, how, you know, just a simple thing like don't lean into the camera, but let the camera come to you. Lighting and all those things. And I had one or two artists on that call who were like, that was worth the whole call right there. So I don't know if that answers your question, Ryan, but.
No, it's just learn, and not every actor and not every artist has the acting and camera experience that someone like Jeff does. So.
Yeah, you know, the thing that I said at the end of last week's, after I listened to everyone, is that authenticity creates intimacy. And intimacy is so important right now when you're playing, as Jeff said, you have to remember that you're not playing to an audience, you're playing to one person, you're playing to that camera and that one person. And I think more than ever, that authenticity, just be yourself, you know. And I'm actually so impressed with how many of our artists, maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but I'm impressed with just how well they do in front of the camera, and how they're just kind of, their natural instinct is to know how to to create that intimate bond between them and and their audience, which is that one person.
Great. I would like to hear more about the side door specifics. We have a audience question about how do you set prices for that kind of performance, and what that might look like. And also I wanted to talk more about, I don't remember exactly if you're able to sort of have because it's a paywall, but are you able to watch from anywhere? Are you interested in keeping the show in a specific market? Can we talk about more of the specifics on that end?
Lara can speak to this too, but I will answer maybe the back end of that question. The idea conceptually, and there are different schools of thought on this. I mean, I want to say that, but this is how we have planned to move forward. The idea is that you want to predominantly play for that particular geographic area, much like if you were on tour on the West Coast and you were playing San Francisco one night and you might be playing Sacramento the next night. That doesn't mean that someone outside, if someone in you know, London wants to buy a ticket to that particular show, they can certainly buy a ticket to that show if they find out about that show. But what they can't do is buy that ticket and then share that link with someone else. So we are trying to do specific geographic areas because I personally think long term that's what sustains this. That if you're just doing shows all the time that are opened up to the world, that model I think could get tired and old pretty quickly. So it's not that different than live tours. You know, you're playing this city on this night. I mean, just this morning I set one up for a market, and you know, there was a clause in there that they didn't want anything else to happen within a certain geographic area within a particular period of time, and I said, sure, you know, we'll make sure we protect your show.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think this is a really important question, and it has a lot to do with how we see the future going. And I like telling my friends, you know, that don't really understand the booking world or kind of what I do on a daily basis, that this is the weirdest time right now for us, because as agents, our job is to live 6 to 12 months in the future. And I like to say we can't see past the nose on our face right now. We have no idea what's going to happen next week. We literally, anyone who says that they know what's going to happen even a month from now is probably lying to you, because nobody knows. And so we're taking our best guess. And what we see, what Fleming Artists sees as this future landscape, especially with the artists that we have on that might be in the vulnerable population, is that even states are reopening. I've done a lot of research over the last week or so, and I'm continuing to keep it up, about each state's reopen plan. And it really is by state right now. And that poses so many questions about routing. Are we going to be able to go through a specific state to get to another state? Is one state going to allow 10 people in their room and the next one's going to allow 100? Where are the hotspots going to be? Are our artists even going to be willing to bring fans together and be responsible for that? Are our artists going to put themselves at risk to go out and play? And the answer that we have for that personally is this idea of the virtual shows. And I know the question here is, how do you price that? Well, you know, it's a supply and demand. That's a question that we as agents ask every day. Personally, I think each artist needs to take into account what overhead they normally have with a touring schedule. If you're normally paying for lodging, gas, equipment, roadies, managers, if those aren't expenses, then maybe reflect that in your ticket price and see if you can lower it a little bit. Because yes, the other question is, and reality is that people are really hurting financially here. I know that people are not comfortable, and live music, even though it's such an amazing thing, is not a mandatory thing for your health, like eating or having shelter. And we understand that. So I think the prices do have to reflect that, but there's no real answer to what you price a ticket at. It's about what the artist is comfortable with. And it's about what they think their fans would be able to pay for and be happy to pay for, because we're not about trying to get fans to pay more than they would feel comfortable with. But I do believe somebody described Facebook Live and YouTube Live, these free shows, as kind of like walking down Bourbon Street. And I appreciate that because, you know, your average engagement level is 30 seconds to a minute, and you don't have people staying and really appreciating the full set. And I think that dilutes it for your fans that would pay $5 or even $20 or even $30 to sit in a room and watch the full concert and be able to chat with the artist and request a song instead of getting lost in this like thousands of people that are on Facebook for 1 minute watching the show, maybe requesting a song and then leaving. So we're trying to find the sweet spot in there. But more than anything else, especially speaking with the geographic areas, something that Side Door is working on right now is something called Geo Gating, and it's an option. It's not mandatory by any means, but we see this playing big in the future, especially with physical limits and capacity limits. I was speaking with a venue the other day. They actually had somebody go in and measure the space to figure out how many people of their current like 1,500 cap, I think, room they would be able to fit in under the current physical distancing laws, and it was something like 200. So it was very sobering for them. And the way that we see working with that is this idea of geo-gating these ticketed shows. What that means is, dependent on your IP address, you would not be able to buy a ticket for a specific show if you did not live within a certain radius physically. And we see that really being something that will help make these shows more unique, make them more intimate, but especially if the artist is going to be able to go out to an actual venue, but only have the room at half capacity or 25% capacity. This is something that will make it realistic for the venues to actually make a profit and cover their costs, to add a virtual tier. And plus, with the vulnerable fans, there are a lot of people that aren't going to feel comfortable going out. And I think as an agency, we want to make sure that we're not alienating those people. They need live music too. So even if the state is open and the current state of affairs in that state is, if you're vulnerable, stay home. If you're not, go out. We want to include those people. They're live music lovers as well. So I think a virtual ticketing tier really helps not lose those fans and still give them access without having to go to a crowded room that could or could not get them a serious illness. So that's where we see the future of this going. And I think, yes, with geogating, the tickets and the crowd, quote unquote, for each show might be smaller, but I think it's going to be higher value for that. And our artists are willing to do that, especially the artists on our roster, singer-songwriters that have so much to say that fans really connect with very intimately. I think this is a really great platform for them to do that in a different way that wasn't really on the forefront before, but we assume will be on the forefront for quite a while afterwards.
Well, yeah, it's a good point, because we hear a lot of, well, again, we don't know what the future is going to look like, but people are contemplating multiple shows, are contemplating how do you keep the merch line down, how do you keep the bathroom line down, and then how many more staff do you have to keep in your building each night. But being able to monetize the same performance that's already happening, even if it's at a much smaller capacity, probably very interesting to our audience.
We're hoping that's the case. That's what we're betting on.
Yeah.
Well, we had some, you already did do the Fleming Fest, which, again, I think you said it was maybe your first full live virtual show, and you probably learned a lot from it. Can you talk about that experience, what that was like?
All right, I'll take that one too. So Ben happens to be my husband. So we're in-house. I have in-house tech support here. And he is a wonderful pandemic combination of a tech guy who is also a drummer, who is also a sound engineer. So we're just very lucky to have him on board. And Fleming Fest was something that we did in reaction to the pandemic immediately. It was 100% donation to the artist. We just asked our entire roster if anybody would want to be a part of it. We offered half-hour sets to anybody on the roster that was interested in testing it out. The specifics that we did, Ben actually built in, we used YouTube, and I don't know if it was unlisted private or I think it was public, but he built an addition to our website that had each one of those links. This is not something that a lot of people have done. I know that there's a question out there about how to do a festival, how to get these half-hour sets that are switching from artist to artist. And this was, it worked really well, and it was because Ben is very adept at technology and website building, because we built it directly into the Fleming artist website. And then he also created a YouTube playlist. So if you were tuning into the entire festival, it would go directly to the next person after the previous artist signed off. But then Ben ran sound checks, very important artists, sound checks, with every platform that you use, and maybe multiple times, because just producing your own shows is something that artists are not used to, and I get that. So make sure you're doing a sound check. Ben ran sound checks with everybody. And then a chat moderator, he was the chat moderator for it as well, and posted the links for the PayPal donation. And it went really well. Yeah, we raised over $3,000, and it went all direct to the artists, and it was great.
And that was a few weeks ago. I mean, that was kind of the early on.
Yeah, things are changing very quickly a few weeks ago.
Oh my God, yeah.
And response from artists has been pretty strong. You said, I'm sure that it's going to be a case-by-case basis when things open back up. Can we talk about any idea of what they may look like, or what your role and your business may look like when shows start to come back?
Well, as I said at the beginning, our role will be the same as it always has been, and that is to try to get artists work. I think that the things that will change, in my estimation, are that we're going to be putting in-person tours together, or live tours, and simultaneously putting together virtual tours. So you might have an artist that in the past has been willing to get on a plane and fly to the West Coast, but they're located on the East Coast, so they might be doing live tours on the East Coast and virtual tours on the West Coast. It also, I think some of the differences will be the thing I mentioned before, where you're doing a show at for us, our sweet spot are the smaller venues. Obviously, we do PACs, performing arts centers, and all that, but we do an awful lot. Volume is always kind of protected. This business, but let's say you have a 400-seat venue in a particular city, because I think too, as a digression a little bit, a lot of artists who didn't play those kinds of venues are going to be out playing them again, because they're going to want to just be playing, period. They're going to be wanting to make money, and they're going to have to recover like everyone else. But if you're in a 400-seat venue, and two things could happen: you sell out, and then you make that show available to the same market, maybe to lower ticket price virtually, or you just go into it saying, I'm going to make this, it's a 400-seat venue, and because of certain restrictions on distancing, it becomes a 100-seat venue. But it doesn't have to be a 100-seat venue, because it can be a 100-seat venue, and then no bounds on how many other people virtually can watch that particular show in that particular market. So I think that's definitely going to be one of the core changes in all of this as far as the future. I think virtual touring, it over time, it might dissipate some, but I think it's going to be a part of our lives for the future. And we have artists, by the way, like Aaron McEwen, who was doing virtual dates years ago. And I have a friend, Andrew McKnight, we were talking to the other day. He was doing virtual tours years ago. So this is not a new thing. It's just become a very incredibly overnight, literally necessary thing for artists to sustain their careers, and for venues to sustain their venues. So that's my prediction.
Well, we were talking too about the definition of what an agent is, and something that we provide at Fleming, being so musician focused, and me personally being a musician and understanding what it's like to be out and putting your shows and your songs and your heart out on the line to these individuals, is we stay in touch with our artists. We gauge their feelings every week. We're making sure that we know where they stand, not just about their health and their safety about going out, but how they're feeling. Are they being creative? Do they need to talk? Because I think it's very important, and connectivity right now is paramount when people are literally stuck in their homes. so we're making sure that we continue an open line of communication with all of our artists, and not only agent to artist, but artist to artist. Just because it is it might be considered above and beyond what an agent does, but I think both Jim and I understand the value and the importance of being an ear during this time, because we do represent them. This is a relationship that we have with each of our artists. And I think it's extremely beneficial to make sure that that's part of what we're providing for them as well.
We did the first get together on April 2nd. It was a Thursday, and we just sent this out to the artists and saying, we're going to do this. We're gonna. Here's the link. We've done it through Zoom, and whoever shows up, shows up. And so we invited all of our artists. We invited all of our managers. And that first one, I think we had about 30 on, and every week since, we've had between anywhere low of 20 to a high of 30. That was to do a few things. That was to convey information to each other. You know, we do workshops. The artists are usually doing workshops for each other. We've had sessions on mental health issues and on how to cope, during a time like this. We've covered a lot of subjects, but the thing that came out of it, and I guess it shouldn't have been a surprise, but it was connecting. It was the artist saying to us, what we really love about this thing is we feel connected, and we still feel like artists because we're interacting with other artists. We're interacting with managers. Last week, our feature was on the managers and what they had, them imparting their wisdom. But it was mostly the connection, that they just felt so much connected. And now, as a result, a lot of them know each other that didn't really know each other before, and they're sharing tips, they're sharing ideas, but mostly they're just kind of supporting each other. And I know that that it's easier for an agency of our size to be able to do those kinds of things. I said before, we're a speedboat. We're not a ship. We were able to pivot pretty quickly. But that's been one of the really, a lot of great things have come out of that, but I think that's one of the best things. It's beautiful. Tom Paxton, 3 weeks ago, at the end of it, he just all of a sudden said, I want to give you all a challenge. Next week, I want you to write a song and perform it. And the line has to, I see tomorrow in your eyes. And so 2 weeks ago, when we had to get together, at the end of it, I left about 15 minutes to the end. Maybe a couple artists will have done that. I should have checked first because 7 of them did. And they came up with such beautiful, heartwarming songs. And each one of them, of course, because their artists were incredibly distinctive. And it was a great thing to behold, to just watch that happen. And artists who kind of came on, some of them come on to these things like pretty down in the dumps, and by the end of it, they're smiling. So
it is important, and I'm curious also about the response from the managers as well as the promoters and the venues that you've been working with during this time. You've been running your own agency for 40 years, and you've seen a lot, but I think this is a kind of a different situation. Just unlike anything we've seen before.
They're the first ones to step up when we say, can you do? Terry Thompson's did a thing last week with Amber Bust on the use of social media during the coronavirus. And you just say, would you all do this? And then they got together and they came up with this little brilliant workshop. So they're stepping up just like everyone else, because we find that the managers, and I'm not saying this is I think the case with anyone who loves the music and is in this business because they love the music, but the managers they're there for the artists too, just like we're there for the artists. I think it's so important for all of us to remember that without the artists, none of us have an occupation, and so that's why we're here to do that. And the managers are right there. They're right there with us.
That's a good point that Lara mentioned earlier, that it's important to include all the fans as well. We don't know what the next few years may look like as far as who wants to go out as opposed to who's allowed to go out. So we have to try to include everybody and be creative in that process as well.
Yeah. Mission accomplished. No,
Let's not
I'm
say that
sorry.
they
We
actually-
said we wouldn't make any political statements, but it's like, oh God, please. Yeah, because, you know, we are following this. I mean, we're following the states that have opened up, and, you know, with the very few exceptions, people just aren't showing up. You know, Fauci said weeks and weeks ago, he said, you know, it's not what any of us decide, it's what the virus decides. So.
Well, of course, you have to respond to your artists, regardless of what you believe. It's about doing what your artists are comfortable with. And
Absolutely. Well, Lara asked that question last week. I mean, it's an opportunity when we do these get-togethers to ask them too. And she said, you know, because we we're responsible agents for a specific artist, you know, talk to us about what your comfort level is. You know, we're not going to, it's an artist by artist thing. We're not going to take this one standard approach to, okay, now it's time to go back out and touring. It's up to them entirely. I was just on a call earlier with Tom Paxton and Don Henry and John Vesner, the Don Juans who play with with Tom. And, you know, when Tom going back out there is a lot different than someone in their 20s going back out there, because Tom's 82, you know, and he's very, very vulnerable. So it might be quite some time before we do that. So in the meantime, we're going to figure out how we can turn a bunch of his dates into virtual dates.
right. Do we see other ways of monetizing? Where we've seen everything from drive-in concerts to shows that are just still happening, and we just hope that they're allowed. There are other untapped potential that you see on the agency side, things that you can monetize.
We have ideas that I'm not at liberty to talk about right now because they're just in the formation stages, but I think that we'll come up with new ways to monetize for the artists if they have other sources of income. Yeah, I don't want to be elusive here, but I
kind of put you on the spot there. Sorry about that.
Do what?
I kind of put you on the spot there. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, that's okay. Not at all. You didn't put me on the spot at all. I think, you know, I would usually be able to share some of these brainstorming ideas, but they're just brainstorming right now. I think that, you know, the artists, no matter what kind of model we have, we're trying to always incorporate into it that the tip jar is there. So if someone looks in and says, man, I love that, I want to give $1,000 to that artist, that they can get that $1,000. But you know, besides, you know, making it possible for artists to sell merch, I suppose, you know, one thing I would say is that the virtual thing opens up the world. So right now, for particular artists, I'm working on maybe one show in the UK that covers all the UK, or one show in Australia that covers Australia. And Lara alluded to this earlier, but if you keep the tickets when you're experimenting like this in markets, if you keep them really reasonable and you go for volume, what you don't have is you're not jumping on a plane and flying, you know, to Australia, which I used to have an office there, so I used to do that. And so you're not literally taking out 4 days of your life just to get there and back, but you're also, the time that you're down there, you're going to be able to perform for people in Australia and have that source of revenue. So the world all of a sudden, which had already become small, you know, because of the technology and because of transportation and all that stuff, it became a lot smaller. So.
Right. Now that's a way to take advantage of the current situation of things we're forced to do, find out what works, and sort of improve on that, I'm sure. Are there more good things to come from this situation? Obviously, it's terrible, and we can't understate just how devastating it's been on the business as a whole. But there's still going to be a hunger for music from the fans and hunger from the artists to create. And health-wise, of course, we'd all expect the demand and the content to be out there. Is there anything good to help us get to that point?
Well, I can speak to an overall philosophical concept, I think, and that is that what's exciting to me is that I think what we're going to experience is a renaissance, and that's not unusual for after a calamity like this, for, you know, historically for a renaissance to follow it. And I think that's going to be beyond just the arts. I think it's going to have to do with, you know, the environment and hopefully, you know, some, you know, for want of a better description, political issues. But I think in the arts that we're going to do that, and what we're interested in, and we don't even know what forms this is going to take, but I just know that it is that we want to participate in the Renaissance as opposed to being on the sidelines and reading about it. So the good things that have come out of this, I think, for all of us, that it certainly allows for more introspection, and I don't think that that's a bad thing. And I think it's in some fashion it's causing all of us in parts of our lives just to slow down. And I think coming out of it too, personally, you know, because if you look at our roster, and if you looked at our roster for the past 40 years, we represent a lot of artists who are very socially and politically engaged. And I think some things will come out of this. For instance, with, you know, our country wouldn't be open today if it wasn't for a lot of the workers that we've all taken for granted for so long. So I'm kind of hoping that there'll be a greater appreciation, and that'll take a tangible form in that people will be just compensated more for some of the work that they've done. The people that work in grocery stores, the people that deliver your mail, the people that pick up your garbage. I mean, all these folks that if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be open today. And the artists are sometimes the people, and oftentimes are the people that are conveying those messages to people and empowering them through that, because they're able to express things for people that they can't express themselves. And they go, oh yeah, I feel that way too. Thank you for doing that and keeping those issues out in front of people. So.
Well, part of that, sort of an unsung hero in the concert world as well as the crew, and with efforts to help keep them employed and getting through this difficult time. Are you seeing any efforts of you, or is there anything that we can do in the meantime to help some of the others in the industry that are frankly out of work on the production side?
Well, I know, for instance, Carsey Bland, one of our artists, does a rent-a-thon every month for her band, because she understands how important it is that, yes, she might be able to file for unemployment, but she needs to make sure that her band is covered as well, because it is part of the family. Tour managers are part of the family, crew is part of the family. And they're all part of the ecosystem as well. I mean, as agents, we're pretty far removed from the actual crew, because it's either the venue or the band itself who has hired those on to bring them in. So we don't have really direct contact with those crew workers. But I do know that we're imparting to our artists that, again, I mean, I use the word ecosystem a lot, but I think a pandemic, when one piece of an ecosystem is threatened, the entire ecosystem is threatened, and on the verge of collapse. And absolutely, crew, even bartenders, you know, bouncers at the door, all of these people, they're part of the ecosystem. Without them, the whole thing goes down as well. So the most that I've seen us be able to do is just impart that to the venues and the artists to make sure that they are trying to include the people that they have taken under their wing and their family as a part of this.
I think that's a great question though, Ryan. I mean, it's something that I hadn't thought about that much, because we've been so involved with the artists, and it would be disingenuous for me to say that I have, but you're absolutely right. And I'm kind of hoping that through the PPP, that there's venues that have applied for that's probably part of their consideration, trying to keep these people employed. So good for you to ask that question. I think all of us in this trade industry business should be thinking about those kinds of things as well.
Right, and of course the artists being able to keep working and new creative ways of doing that, and incorporating the venues like you have through Side Door is all going to help us get there, I think. So we're all, as we say, in it together, right?
I mean, it's cliche, but it's so true. We really are all in this together. And it's something I remember on a call, one of the Thursday meetings, I said something like, I think we've all taken a second to realize where we are on the spectrum of need. And it's very true. If you're an introspective person, you realize day to day, whether it is going to be an issue for you to put food on your table, pay your rent, or not. And that right now is something that we in the trade, in the industry, in the business, I think we all need to take very close track of that, and then figure out what we can do for those that are below us. Because if you're comfortable, then there's somebody that you can be helping that's not. And in this ecosystem, that's self-preservation. It's not even philanthropy. We need to look at this like we need to make sure the entire ecosystem survives. And so that's just a take that we have as an agency. And I'm hoping that that disseminates instead of this idea of every man for himself. Because honestly, the idea of every man for himself in something like this is not going to work out. Because if you're alone, if you're an alone artist, that's it, where you're going to play. If you're a venue and you're alone, who's going to play in your venue? And if you're a fan and you're alone, what are you going to do with your time? So it's all part of it. And as cliche as it is, it's the word. We need to make sure that we're all taking care of each other.
We do have one question, a pretty good practical one, just about the streaming shows internationally. If we're going to do them on different continents, even, I guess, how would you accommodate for the time differences or other things of that nature that's a little different if you're doing from
Yeah,
the West Coast across the world?
I can answer that. We just do. I mean, today when I was talking with the UK, London is the artist I'm talking about is in the Eastern time zone. So they would be doing a show at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that would be an 8 o'clock show, for instance, in London. It becomes a little more challenging when you're dealing with, Australia, which is, I think, 14 hours. But it's just a logistical thing. We just figure it out, and we will.
We figure out how to do the Zoom calls. So
yeah, Ben Folds has been doing a live series from Australia every Saturday. So he is a great example. There is a way to make sure it all happens. You just have to keep cognizant of it.
It just means at the end of your set, you're going, man, I had a great show tomorrow.
Definitely, we're able to not stick to certain confines of the typical nightclub venue as well.
Right.
2 drink minimum from your fridge, maybe. Well, thanks so much for your time. I think we've covered just about everything we've needed to touch on. This is an interesting space. It's a difficult time for us all, but agencies are just as relevant as ever, and always advocating for artists and keeping everybody busy. And we're all working together, and we need multiple perspectives. So again, thank you for your time. And
well, thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for asking such great questions.
And
we really appreciate it.
Stay tuned on Pollstar. We'll have the full video up as well as a recap. So thanks again for your time, and everybody be well.